I did very little dating before I met my husband when I was 34. Nobody ever asked me out. Through therapy and introspection, I eventually realized that I had an invisible wall around me. It wasn't always that invisible. I had carried around an extra 40 pounds in high school because I didn't want to let anybody in. If you let someone in, you can get hurt. So eventually, through therapy and everything else, I worked most of that out. I had a couple of what my psychiatrist called transitional relationships, which means they weren't important ones. And then one day, over the holidays, a friend of mine invited me to a little get-together. And I went there, and there was Mel. It turned out that he and I were the only single people at the party. We were the only Jewish people. And we were the only short people. I like to say that we're fun size. And we talked a little bit. And then after we left, apparently our friends were talking about us. And a couple days later, my friend called and said, would you be interested in going out with Mel? And I was surprised at how enthusiastically I said yes. I always thought he had asked her for my number, but I found out years later, she just called him up and said, I heard you on Margie's number. But it's okay, and he called me. The first date, we went out for brunch, which I thought was a brilliant first date. Now, I should say that all those years when I didn't really see anybody, I did have a fantasy that when I found the right person, we would be completely comfortable with each other from the beginning. We would talk for hours and hours, and he would never want to spend the night without me. Well, Mel and I dated. It was amazing. And guess what? We were completely comfortable with each other from the word go. We talked for hours and hours, and before too long, he never wanted to spend the night without me. Now, on the 4th of July, we'd only been dating less than 4 months, and we were at a friend's house seeing the fireworks over the Detroit River. His apartment overlooked the river, and we started talking about apartments. We had a very abstract discussion about people living together, and he said that at this point in his life, if he liked somebody enough to live with them, he would marry them. I said, what the heck is that? You know, it didn't make much sense to me. Now, a couple weeks later, I took my mother on a cruise to Alaska. This had been arranged in advance. She knew she was lucky with the timing because once I started dating him, she would have been out. And the whole time on the cruise, you know, you couldn't call on the phone, or there was no cell phones. And so you could only call when you went to a port. And when I called him and I'd come back, my mother would say, oh, you just perk up as soon as you talk to him. She says to me, you know, what if you married him? What would be the worst thing that could happen? You get divorced. But this was coming from the most bitterly divorced woman on the planet. And I was a divorce lawyer for 4 years. I know what I'm talking about. She was the worst. So at the end of the cruise, she flew home. He flew out to Seattle. And the next morning he says, will you marry me? And I was taken aback. I said, oh, I've been thinking about that lately. He said, yes, but you haven't answered. He said, take your time. Take a month. And I say, that's okay. I will marry you. And as soon as I said that, I thought to myself, you've just made the biggest mistake of your whole life. You don't even know this person. How are you going to get out of this without hurting his feelings? So I say, let's not tell anyone, because I figure if we don't tell anyone, it'd be easier to get out of it. We spent that day walking around Seattle. We could have been here, because we paid no attention to our surroundings. We're asking each other questions like, how much money do you make? So I'm happy to say that November will be 39 years. And you know what? As soon as we got off the plane, I called my mother and told her we were getting married. And he's looking at me like, what happened to, we're not going to tell anyone. But the truth is that in my heart, it wasn't risky at all.